Now, if maybe you're from a younger crowd, or perhaps just decided to skip NGE during the height of its popularity, where maybe a friend introduced you to the EVA world through the Rebuild films, and as such have a close attachment to them, I am in no way going to attempt to rob you of that experience. I would never forcefully try and convince someone that what they've experienced was shallow or soulless if it meant something to them. Hell, I remember when I just couldn't stop talking about Neon Genesis back in the day, there were still plenty of people who didn't share my sentiment. If there was a special connection with you in the Rebuilds, then that's that. It's just a matter of taste. Now that's quite enough emotional buffer, let's get into why one is tastier than the other. Evangelion 1.0 is going to be scarcely mentioned during the course of this analysis because, in my opinion, while it didn't do much to rebuild the Evangelion franchise as Anno had suggested, it was a very promising start to this new film adaptation series. For longtime EVA fans, 1.0 was a strange experience come 2007 when it released in theaters. The opening scene mirrors that of the End of Evangelion's ending scene, hinting at a possible continuation basically before the movie's even begun. The oceans are red like the End of Evangelion. We have a strange white outline against a hillside that wasn't there before. The Angel's number system is all messed up. Everyone at NERV already knows about Lilith. What the hell is going on with Lilith? This was an exciting time for us, just like before. No one knew what was going on, and while we had basically seen all of this already in Neon Genesis Evangelion, it still had an air of mystique that really made you wonder where the series was headed. And then, of course, we're treated to Kaoru on the moon and his oh-so-cryptic line, "Additionally, this film really helped to give the viewer a feel for what kind of person Shinji is, even if it's not necessarily a very likable person, all adding to that good old EVA feel that we've all come to know and love. And again, it basically was the closest thing to a carbon copy that we could get, but a good primer to the Rebuild series as a whole. Fast forward to late March 2009. We are treated to a beautiful Evangelion 2.0 trailer to Utada Hikaru performing a lovely rendition of Fly Me to the Moon. We see enough to speculate and theorize for a long, agonizing months ahead as we wait for what is sure to be one of the best animated films ever made. 2 more trailers release, we get a glimpse of a new character, Mari Makanami, we get a runtime, and most importantly, a theatrical release date. Get hype. The promised time is nigh, and in many ways, it was. Evangelion 2.0. Here is a game changer. This is the arc of the Rebuilds and everything that they stand for. Now, Evangelion 2.0 is not a bad movie. In fact, by anime and overall just film standards, it is a wonderful standalone story. Really, it's a great piece of work. If you want a movie that has a steady pace, lots of action, tons of budget, moderate amounts of fan service, engaging character interaction, and a conclusion that leaves you begging for more, then this is your film. But to a longtime Evangelion fan, this is where everything came As a movie, 2.0 operates just fine, more than fine even based on what I just said, but that's a criteria for being passable. It's kind of like a high school diploma. Everyone celebrates it, but it's expected of you, and when you're coming off the shoulders of, say, a quantum physicist or a brain surgeon, we're going to expect a lot more, and the first 3 Rebuilds get their diplomas. Now, if only they had made us proud and gone to college. I'm not going to sum up the events of the Rebuilds. If you're here, I'll just assume that you've already seen them. And if not, then you're just along for the ride, and that's fine too. I never gave much of a spoiler warning during the first part of this video analysis because it mainly focused on the 15-year-old Neon Genesis Evangelion. But for the Rebuild's sake, I'll give you a heads up. Spoilers. When it comes to building an atmosphere in a work of fiction, the characters that inhabit that setting are a lot more pivotal than you'd imagine. You can have the most believable, living, breathing world of death and decay as possible, but if the players in the field are hollow, the whole machine ceases to function as well as it should. A good example of stellar characters in a dreary, haunting setting is the 1985 film Angel's Egg. If you haven't watched that yet, I'd recommend it, especially if you like weird, kind of surreal things like Evangelion. The characters here speak maybe 5 separate lines of dialogue throughout the entirety of the presentation, but still manage to come off as emotionally complex, or in the stranger's case, mysteriously conflicted. Now, I am in no way implying that Evangelion 2.0 or 3.0's characters are at all hollow or soulless. It's more like they're just not all there. Now, any Rebuild advocate will tell you this is because it's a movie. These movies don't have 26 episodes to develop characters fully, and with the time that they are given, they do just fine, but this is where my train of thought deviates. This is where I get off, and I am left feeling disconnected from the world, and for lack of a more in-depth explanation, sad. We have established already that it's not difficult to create emotionally complex, engaging characters within a limited time and severely short dialogue exchanges, with Angel's Egg being our most shining example. So what's the deal with the Rebuilds? Honestly, I'm not entirely sure how to dive into this whole thing considering I have so much to say, or even which end to go in from, so let's just pick a random location and begin. The rebuild's most influential characters are Shinji, Asuka, Misato, Rei, Gendo, Ritsuko, Kaji, Fuyutsuki, Kaoru, and now Mari Makanami. Random starting point, Misato, or as I prefer to call her in the rebuild case, the Shadow of Misato. Again, things start off fine in 1.0, just like in Neon Genesis Evangelion, we learn that she has had a tumultuous relationship with her father. This in turn helps both Shinji and Misato to familiarize with one another, to understand that on a fundamental level, they have something in common, which in turn makes it easier for the two of them to open up to each other, even in the slightest bit later on. Misato is arguably one of the most complex characters in Eva's universe. Neon Genesis summarizes her as a young girl who's always hated her father due to his distance and neglect. She could never forgive him for this, and never truly knew how he viewed both her and her mother, if nothing more than an inconvenience to his work. Yet during his final moments with her, in the midst of Second Impact, he gave up everything, including his own life and the research he cared so much for, to preserve her life, leaving her confused, anguished, and unable to comprehend his actions. This resulted in Misato becoming a mute. She was confined to a facility. Her onlookers predicted that she would never recover from the trauma she had witnessed and that her mind was lost. But she suddenly bounces back. She's strong, but damaged. She subconsciously seeks out men that remind her of her father and finds Kaji, and they begin their sexual relationship. She finds herself unable to commit to the thought of motherhood because she knows now that she is in the very same position as her father and worries of the potential neglect she might instill upon her own children. She begins to see her father in herself. She openly admits that her father complex is why she's so attracted to Ryoji Kaji. She finds solace in playing the mother figure to Shinji, letting him into her home days after he arrives in Tokyo. It's the first suggestion that she makes after Gendo and Shinji come to the mutual agreement that they don't want anything to do with each other, again paralleling the relationship that Misato had with her father, who, although she still feels contempt for, fights against the angels in his stead, described by Ritsuko as a personal vendetta. She takes Shinji in. Soon she finds out that it's not as easy to be a mother to someone as she had hoped. She becomes depressed at the sight of herself, so she's forced to buy dress after dress and attend weddings of old college friends. Her and Ritsuko joke about it playfully in one episode, and you hear the disappointment in her voice. She turns to alcohol to drown her sorrows and combat these truths. Later, it's even implied that the strong, skewed maternal instincts that she feels for Shinji turn to minute sexual attraction. Misato's a nice lady, but like nice ladies in the real world, she's got a messed up side to her. Because that's often what happens to people when they experience trauma, and this is what's conveyed in Neon Genesis Evangelion so well, with such subtlety that you find yourself coming back and catching things that just never clicked before. Go back and watch the first couple of episodes again, knowing what you now know. Whoa, Misato was really quick to suggest Shinji live with her, alone, in an apartment with no locks, where you share the same facilities, living conditions, and personal traumas. Now allow me to go over what aspects of Misato's personality are covered in the rebuilds. Her dad died saving her in an over-the-top 4-second flashback sequence, as told by Kaji to Shinji at a water park. Long gone is the scene where Misato looks up and has the entry plug capsule door shut on her just as she's about to utter a word. Long gone is the somber scene where the camera pans out slowly to reveal her father lie on top of the plug and die in its embrace, to further symbolize the wall between the two characters. It's never mentioned that Misato was a mute, if she ever even was in this timeline. It's never mentioned or even implied that she has a father complex. Her maternal instincts are shadowed by robot cartwheels, front flips, and slapstick humor. No weddings, sexual implications, no conflict, no nothing. Just a shadow of the old Misato, played by the same voice actress. And then comes 3.0, 14 years after this hollow recreation of Misato. Is this the same Misato that we've all grown to know and love piloting this giant spaceship? Who knows, she only has 10 minutes of screen time at best. I could go on about one of my most beloved characters in film, but I won't, you get the idea. So let's move on. What if I told you that every character in the rebuilds has more or less been given this same treatment as Misato? Take a look at Ritsuko, there's even less here. Remember in the first video where I told you about how she's the crazy cat lady? Don't worry, she's not anymore. She acts the same as she always had, like a good little shadow should, but there's still a wealth of substance lost. It's never once implied that she had a relationship with Gendo, ever. One of the most important aspects of the story. She's supposed to be engulfed by loneliness. She's the brains behind the execution of almost every technological aspect of the show. She has the keys to the Magi, and Gendo kept her on a leash and constantly working by acting as her lover. And this is gone. Remember Ritsuko's mom, the one that added that entire intricate layer to the Evaverse by acting as Ritsuko's predecessor, sleeping with Gendo, strangling a child and committing suicide, setting the events of Ritsuko's involvement and Nerve's effed up scenario in motion? Yeah, she's gone. She's just non-existent. Asuka. Oh my god, Asuka. What did they do to you? The name change from Soryu to Shikinami must mean a total change in character because this is not Asuka. You might as well have changed everything, full name and appearance as well. It seems the only thing that transferred over from Neon Genesis to 2.0 is the fact that Asuka's a bitch. There you go, Studio Kara. Nailed it. Hey, here's an idea, team. Let's cram all of what makes Asuka's personality what it is, constantly seeking approval and recognition due to growing up with a mother in an insane hospital who would never see her own child as hers, before hanging herself from the ceiling only to have an adolescent Asuka walk in moments after her grisly death into a 5-second scene with a hand puppet. Nailed it! Asuka is just as complex as Misato. She's the typical tsundere everything until you actually watch Neon Genesis all the way through. She has trust issues. She grew up watching her mother speak to a doll as if it were her own child and then refer to Asuka in the third person as some other girl that she didn't even recognize. And then her death. Asuka's also a strong girl, just like Misato. Evangelion is filled with strong women. For all of the faults and negativities that follow the cast, this is a story about strong characters where if any lesser person were placed in their roles, they would not have been able to go on. Asuka's shocking encounter with her dead mother resulted in premature maturity. She's too eager to prove that she's an adult. She terrified her relatives that she lived with after her mother's suicide because she never acted like a little girl, tearing apart the toys that she gave her and rarely behaving in a way that a little girl should. She seeks acceptance from Kaji by attempting to seduce him, literally begging to be recognized as an adult. The show goes on to detail Asuka's increasingly deranged state of mind as she has to deal with her period while failing sync ratio tests, the only thing in the world that keeps her going, piloting the Evangelion, lapping up that recognition, when in reality she's experienced similar traumas to Misato and Shinji when it comes to parental influence and loss. Shinji lost his mother and arguably his father. This is a story about loss. Asuka even comments in one episode how she doesn't want to use the same bathwater as Shinji and Misato. She mentions in another how she hates how the doors have no locks in Misato's apartment. There's more to it than just that. She doesn't like being a part of them. She doesn't want to appear weak like them. She doesn't want to admit that she's similar, and she doesn't want to open up. Am I saying that the rebuilds would have been a leap greater if they included a scene of Asuka experiencing menstrual cramps? I don't know, fucking maybe. But what's undeniable is that there is a human element missing from the rebuilds in regard to characters that drags the show down to a high school diploma status. It's sad to know this is what's becoming the face of Evangelion. It's no longer that strange, mystical, uncomfortable familiarity we associated with back in the 90s. It's become a parade of shadow characters and rainbows and CGI. I would say that this concludes part 2 of the Evangelion vs. Rebuilds analysis, but it really doesn't. This is actually just the first half of part 2, but my editor can't handle all this that I'm putting into it. So I decided to split it into 3 parts, so just hold on a little bit, guys. I'll get that up, and then probably after I release the 3rd part, I don't know if you know how editing works, but if there's a bunch of stuff on the timeline in an editor, like with what I got right now, it's difficult to work with on an old crappy computer like mine. So what I'm going to do is after I export this 2nd part here into a full, just one thing of video, and I export the 3rd part, same thing, just one thing of video, I'm going to take the 1st part, 2nd part, and the 3rd part, and I'll just put them all in the timeline, and I'm going to export it as one giant thing. So look forward to that in the future. I'm going to have the Neon Genesis versus the rebuild of Evangelion as just one whole giant video, just for convenience's sake. So if you want to send it to your friends or something, you don't want them to have to look through 3 separate videos, that's right there. But yeah, so just hold out. Part 3 is coming up, and then, you know, I'll have the full thing come out too. Thanks again for sticking with me during all this. Until next time.